Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. Did you catch Dark Brandon's latest speech about the extreme MAGA Republicans last night? It's like changed. It was extreme MAGA, it's ultra MAGA, and now it's mega MAGA, which I actually kind of like. I like alliteration. It flows. Mega MAGA Republicans last night. He spoke to the American people about the threats to democracy just days before Americans cast their ballots in the midterm elections. And we're going to get into all of that when Andrew Klavan joins us in just a bit of the Daily Wire. But we begin today with a deep dive on a hugely important issue, and that is the origins of COVID. Did it come from a lab? Did it come from nature? With millions dead, we've got over 1 million Americans dead now around the world, even more. Not knowing is not an option, right? Why? How is it that we can't have a definitive answer by now? Today, we have two scientific experts with us who have completely different points of view on how it started. I'm going to be joined in a bit by Dr. Alina Chan, a molecular biologist and scientific advisor at MIT and Harvard. She wrote a book on why she believes the science points to COVID originating in a lab. But we begin today with Dr. Robert Garry, virologist from Tulane University, who now believes from his research that COVID did not originate in a lab, but instead came from nature. And he was somebody closely in touch with Dr. Fauci at the beginning of this whole thing before Dr. Garry and others published a piece in Nature magazine saying this looked like it had natural origins. Is your business still using spreadsheets and emails to manage important sales commission? Not a good idea. Is your support and operations staff stretched thin? Are your salespeople constantly trying to piece together the puzzle for what they're getting paid for and what's potentially missing? This is all inefficient. This is where ClearComp comes in to help you. ClearComp is a one-stop shop for your business to manage sales commission documentation like commission plan info, product info, and facts. It's basically a sales operations and sales enablement dream platform. ClearComp works seamlessly with your billing, CRM, ERP, and HR systems, all with the goal of helping your organization become more efficient and helping your sales team become more productive. Why should they be wasting time worrying about that other stuff? Their dashboards and tools help you identify the low-hanging fruit, what opportunities are hot, where you can improve. And as a salesperson, no more black box commission statements, no more hunting around for the latest and greatest decks and one-sheeters. Modernize your sales organization today by visiting clearcomp.com. That's CLEARCOMP.com. Book a demo and tell them I sent you. Dr. Garry, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. All right, so let's just get into it because as I understand it, the best case, and forgive me because I am not a doctor, but the best case for this coming from a lab is that it has something called a furin cleavage site in it. Mm-hmm. And that is something not, except in very rare cases, seen in nature, and that it's never been seen in a coronavirus of this type ever before. This is it. And it just so happens to emerge in the very same city where there's a lab doing exactly this kind of research, right? So how do you dismiss the furin cleavage site?
So just to correct a few things, furin cleavage sites are not rare in coronaviruses at all. There are many coronaviruses that have furin cleavage sites. So,
of this type, like SARS, like those types of coronaviruses?
Okay, so the SARS-like coronaviruses, they're a specific subgenus of a genus in the coronavirus family. There are lots of coronaviruses, hundreds.
Okay, but is it true that there's never been a furin cleavage site in a SARS-type coronavirus?
So if you draw that line very narrowly, so let me give you an analogy here. I've heard it put.
But can you just answer and then give me my analogy, because that way we can keep.
So in the subgenus, this small part of this genus of the beta coronaviruses, there's not been another one with a furin cleavage site. But let me tell you what that's like. So I've heard the analogy. It's like finding a horn on a horse in one city, but that's not really. And looking for unicorns, right? So it's not really a unicorn. It's like finding a horn on a white horse. But there are lots of different colors of horses, right? So you've got black horses and brown horses and, spotted horses and the like. And all these brown and black and spotted horses, they could have horns, right? And that's the furin cleavage site. So it's like saying, there's just one small member of the family that, has an unusual feature, and, somehow or other that's unusual. It's not.
Okay.
It's not.
And there's a wide range of scientists who disagree with your assertion on that and say that it is highly unusual and it's the smoking gun.
To think that furin cleavage site is natural. It's a site in the virus where, that changes very frequently. Okay. It's a highly volatile site. There's nothing unusual about that furin cleavage site when you look at it. It's actually, if you compare it to other coronaviruses, the furin cleavage site, the nucleotides that were put in there are out of frame. And that probably doesn't mean much to many of your viewers, but it's very significant for a virologist who, if you think that it was cloned in there somehow, there's really no reason for a scientist to put that in out of frame. And there's some other features of it too that look perfectly natural.
Well, wait a minute. There is a reason for scientists to put it in there if they're researching bat coronaviruses and looking for ways to make them more dangerous or more contagious in humans, which is exactly what they were doing in this Wuhan lab.
Well, I don't think they were trying to make them more dangerous. They were trying to figure out how they, cause disease in people. So there's a big difference between, trying to do work that would, create a bioweapon and one that's just, trying to find out, what kind of viruses are out there and what are potentially,
Yeah, but I accept that. But they definitely were looking at bat coronaviruses in this Wuhan lab and ways, I'll just go with your language, to make them more contagious. Yeah. And the furin cleavage site was a way to, as I understand it, and this is how it was explained to me, to basically, you insert this in, it tells the cell, open up. I'm something you want, but it's a lie. It's not something the cell wants. It's dangerous. Yeah. And then it tells the cell to manufacture more coronavirus, and then the cell complies, and then they go out and they attack other cells, and it's almost like a computer virus in the way it multiplies very efficiently. And that's what a furin cleavage site does, and that's why we don't really like furin cleavage sites in viruses like this.
Well, a lot of coronaviruses have furin cleavage sites. I mean, there are two common cold coronaviruses that infect people that have furin cleavage sites. So it's not necessarily the smoking gun of a gain of function research or anything along those lines. It's just something that
but you're
occasionally pick up on.
I'm just trying to explain what a furin cleavage site does and why we don't like it and why it's a problem in the coronavirus.
Even these relatively mild common coronavirus.
Well, you said that before, but then you already admitted not in the SARS family, and that's why people are suspicious of this one. But here's the thing: so we don't like the fact that it's got a furin cleavage site, and there's a reason why the Wuhan lab and Peter Daszak's group, EcoHealth Alliance, which is funded by the United States, by Fauci's group, that they wanted to experiment with the furin cleavage site being put into a coronavirus very much like this one. They asked for permission. They wanted funding from the Defense Department, which the Defense Department said no to, saying they believed it would be too dangerous. Yeah. Nonetheless, we believe this kind of work was being done at the Wuhan lab. Do you dispute it?
Well, I do dispute it. I think that, there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there that say that, a U.S. lab, and laboratory technologies that were developed here were then, somehow or other used to create the SARS coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2. I mean, there's just really no evidence for that whatsoever. There's a lot more scientific evidence on the fact that this virus emerged just like a lot of other emerging viruses do from nature, from the wildlife trade, in fact.
Well, I concede to you there is no evidence that this coronavirus we've been dealing with, SARS-CoV-2, came from the Wuhan lab or from, there's no evidence.
Or from American technology. And I think that's very important to point out. I mean, that a lot of fingers have been pointed at some scientists in the U.S. like Peter Daszak and some scientists at the University of North Carolina, for example, saying that they somehow or other engineered this furin cleavage site into SARS-CoV-2. There is absolutely no evidence for that. They didn't do that.
I got you. And we're trying to make a distinction now between general coronavirus research, bat coronavirus research that may have included insertion of a furin cleavage site, and research that led to this coronavirus we've all been dealing with in this pandemic. And that second leap, there's no proof for that yet. There's supposition, there's circumstantial evidence, people have their beliefs, but I can see to you.
There's conspiracy theorists like to do that, but it just didn't happen that way.
Well, I don't know if that's true either. There's no proof to exonerate him either, but there's no proof condemning him. But on the first question of the research he was doing on coronaviruses, Peter Daszak and the Wuhan lab, that is potentially problematic. And on the unicorn example you just cited, they went to the Defense Department and said, please let us do research on how to get a horn on a horse. We really want to put a horn on a horse. Please let us. And the Defense Department said, we're not going to fund that. That seems dangerous for whatever reason. And then lo and behold, a horse with a horn started walking around Wuhan, China, right next to the very lab in which they wanted to do this very research. And the scientists say it's not unusual for scientists to go in and seek funding for something they actually already have underway.
Well, if you looked at other research grants, again, I just want to emphasize to your audience that there is no evidence that U.S. labs and scientists were involved in creating this virus. And the horn on the horse, the unicorn analogy, it really falls apart really quickly when you think, okay, it's just one, this is a white horse, but there are black horses and brown horses and a lot of other kinds of horses and donkeys and things like that have the furin cleavage site. So it's really not it's really not the smoking gun for the lab leak proponents. In fact, if you really look closely at the site and how viruses acquire these furin cleavage sites, you can see that it's just been a perfectly natural process as to how SARS-CoV-2 got this furin cleavage site.
Well, why did you originally think that it was likely from a lab? Because we've seen in your correspondence with Fauci and Collins that you initially took a look at this along with other virologists and experts and said things like, I can't think of a plausible natural scenario. That was February 2nd, 2020, where you get a bat virus or one very similar to it, where you insert exactly these amino acids and nucleotides that all have to be added and so on. Yeah. And then you said, I just can't figure out how this gets accomplished in nature. And then 2 days later, then you spoke to Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, and then within days you completely reversed yourself and did a 180 and said it can't possibly be lab leak. It is nature.
Yeah. So let me correct that a little bit. That was one email that I had sent to some of my colleagues that were looking at this. One email out of hundreds of emails and different kinds of Zoom calls and things like this, where we're discussing the possibilities about where this virus might have come from. And my colleagues and I who wrote that paper in Nature Medicine, when we took on this, sort of trying to figure out where it had come from, we told ourselves we need to be agnostic about all the different possibilities. We need to not let, some of our priors and some of our, previous experience, really bias us. And, if we would have come up with, data and evidence that the virus had leaked from the lab, we would have been the first ones out there saying, this virus leaked from the lab. So that one email that you just read is, like I said, hundreds of emails. I actually wrote it, at an evening. I was at a Mardi Gras ball here. I'm in New Orleans, right? So, I was typing on my iPhone there and, just got this question, what's the evidence that, this furin cleavage site is natural or not. And that's what I typed out. But, as I, got further into the whole genome and looking at the virus, it came clear pretty quickly that, this virus, all these features that we were looking at were perfectly natural. So, there were some other people that I was dealing with, you've heard the names Christian Anderson and Eddie Holmes and a few others, Andrew Rambo, that, may have been a little bit more open to the lab hypothesis early on until they started looking at it. I was, always more of the, on the, this is natural, and I'm going to have to find something really, unusual to make me think that it's going to be a lab leak. So like
forgive me, wasn't it just days? Wasn't it just 2 days later that you reversed yourself and said, actually, no, okay, I forget what I said about it coming from a lab. I now say it's natural.
It wasn't really a reversal. It's what scientists do. We kick around ideas, we have, private conversations. Sometimes you're playing devil's advocate. That's pretty much what I was doing in that one email. What happened in those 48 hours? What changed? What did you see? Well, and looked at the genomes of the viruses more closely. I mean, in fact, at that time too, there was another, piece of data that came out. The famous pangolin coronavirus, right? And this virus, when we looked at the genome of that, and it happened all in that time frame. There's another site besides the furin cleavage site that we were focusing in on. It's called the receptor binding domain, and that receptor binding domain also, was causing us a little bit of, head scratching. Where did that come from? Because it was unlike any other, receptor binding domain that we'd seen in any coronavirus anywhere. But, what made the pangolin coronavirus so significant is that its RBD, or receptor binding domain, this little fragment of the spike protein that helps the virus attach to the cell, was very similar to what was the RBD, the receptor binding domain in SARS-CoV-2. So, that pangolin coronavirus was a natural virus. We knew that for sure. It wasn't a fake virus somebody just put onto a website.
But how does that prove? How does that prove anything about SARS-CoV-2? How do you? I can see why maybe you say, all right, that requires further study. How do you in 48 hours come out and publish a paper saying this is natural? I mean, because what happened, the thing that bothered me when I saw all this go down was, why didn't all these experts, because it's very suspicious, talk to Fauci, talk to Collins, who are on record as not wanting this to be a lab leak theory, as saying this would be very damaging if that's what comes out. And then suddenly all these virologists reverse themselves. And it's one thing if you can say, Megyn, let me show you what I saw that proved to me. We found the pangolin. That's why. I'd say, gotcha, I get it. But there's nothing that proved this thing came from nature in those 48 hours. Nothing. What happened was there was communication with Fauci and Collins.
The binding domain was natural, because it was in the pangolin. And, if you find that site, as a natural thing, then, it's logical to make to go to the next step and say, well, the whole thing is natural. And let me step back to something that you just said about Drs. Fauci and Collins. They were agnostic about it too. I mean, I never got any impression.
That's not true.
One of them.
That's not true.
Because
we have their writings. Forgive me, because you can tell me what your conversations were. I'm just telling you
what my
and only you know
was.
that.
You can come to a different conclusion, but they didn't try to influence us when we wrote the Nature paper or Nature Medicine paper, or even tell us, oh, you got to write it this way or any way like that. They were completely hands off on that. They had just what that conference was about, really, that teleconference on February 1, that, there's been so much air about it, and a lot of speculation and everything. I mean, really what happened was, a lot of virologists were called together by Jeremy Farrar. He is the head of the Wellcome Trust in the UK. And, he called his friend Tony Fauci, and Fauci also got, his boss on there, Francis Collins from the NIH. And a bunch of other virologists that, had expertise in how viruses emerge. And, this is, I think, perfectly natural. This is what you want people that are, advising, the president of the United States and Congress and also, the parliament in the UK. You want these people to get the best information that they possibly can. And,
let me jump in. I accept all that, but this guy Farrar, he's a Brit. He is the one who initially sent an email to Fauci and Collins expressing support for the lab leak theory, citing you, among others, saying Robert Garry, quote, cannot think of a possible natural scenario, saying he, quote, this other guy, Farzan, he says he was bothered by the furin site and having a hard time explaining it outside the lab, saying Farzan favored the lab leak over natural origin, 70-30 or 60-40. And then Farrar, he wrote a book, actually, saying two other experts advising Fauci and Collins were strongly in the lab leak camp. Christiane Anderson, who I know you've worked with and gotten research grants with, he put the lab leak theory at 60 to 70%. Eddie Holmes of Sydney put it at 80%, and so on. Mm-hmm. And so this is all the information going into Fauci and Collins. All of these top experts, including yourself, saying,
and some of us had
I got it. You
changed their mind.
I got it.
You
changed your mind in 48 hours. And what we do know, and I understand Collins may not have said it to you, according to you, but he is on record as saying we must, quote, put down this very destructive conspiracy theory, meaning the lab leak. So he didn't sound exactly open-minded
Let me put that quote in a little bit more context. I mean, and I remember this. It's not, and it's not well discussed, but, there was actually a preprint that came out right around that time, right before that teleconference, that said that basically this SARS-CoV-2 was a hybrid or a chimera between, some coronavirus and HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. And that preprint was making a lot of, rounds in the media, and people were touting it. Oh, this is like the smoking gun. This virus came from a lab and they engineered it. They combined the most dangerous parts of HIV, including that furin cleavage site, into SARS-CoV-2. And this is really what I think, Dr. Collins's quote is really addressing those dangerous conspiracy theories about, the virus having been engineered and possibly, put together with HIV. I don't think he was making like general, comments or anything like that. We were specific.
No, I don't think you're correct. He went on to say, first of all, wondering if there's something NIH can do to help put down this very destructive conspiracy with what seems to be growing momentum.
Yeah.
With a link to a segment done by my old pal Brett Baer at Fox News about sources being increasingly confident that the coronavirus outbreak started in the Wuhan lab. Then he goes on to say, I hoped that the Nature Medicine article that you participated in after the 48-hour shift on the genomic sequence of SARS-CoV-2 would settle this, but probably didn't get much visibility. Anything more we can do? Asked the National Academy to weigh in. He clearly wanted this to go away. Then Fauci chimes in, it's a shiny object. It will go away in times. I wouldn't do anything about it right now. I mean, to suggest this is all about an AIDS concern is belied by their own writings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a spokesman for the NIH or anybody like that. I think our evidence, at the time we published that, I think that quote you're talking from is in April. I mean, most of the scientists that had looked at it by that time were saying, yeah, we've got to dismiss all these conspiracy theories about the virus having been engineered at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's just there's no evidence for it.
Well, okay. I mean, that's my point, is that's what Fauci and Collins were saying. Let's get rid of this theory about what was happening at the lab, that this came from a lab.
The science was very clear then. It's very clear now. I mean, the virus, they didn't have, a virus like SARS-CoV-2 at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They didn't stick a furin cleavage site in it. There's just... You
don't know that. You absolutely do not know that.
I mean, based on all the science and the evidence that we've gathered, I mean, it's just extremely unlikely that they had anything close to SARS-CoV-2.
Well, that's different than no. That's it. Now you're admitting that you're just positing this. Extremely unlikely is different from I know she didn't do it. There was bat coronavirus
beyond a
gain of function research going on.
Well,
do you deny that there was bat coronavirus gain of function research going on in the Wuhan lab between this woman who is referred to as the Bat Lady and EcoHealth Alliance?
I mean, there was research being done, but there was no research being done on a virus that could have been converted into SARS-CoV-2. They didn't have the backbone. They didn't have anything close that was, 99.9% similar.
Have you seen what they had? Because we've asked the Chinese repeatedly, including from the start, and they didn't provide it. So how do you know?
I mean, they would have published on it before. I mean, and you can't find, it's hard to find in nature. So, how did they get it? And there's another thing.
Well, how do you know they would have published that? What if they were doing it nefariously? They wouldn't have published on it. That's a possibility, no?
I mean, we're diving into conspiracy theories there. They were working.
No, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a question. It's a question. You can't dismiss a legitimate question by labeling it a conspiracy theory. That's a tactic. That's not science.
You would have to postulate that there were all these people working, like Daszak and the University of North Carolina scientists and the people from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The most elite coronavirus virologist in the world, that somehow or other they got together and said, okay, we're going to cover up the fact all this time, 3 years now almost, that we were working on the virus and and that we had engineered it. I mean, that sounds to me like a conspiracy. Now, if you don't want to call it a conspiracy theory, I guess that's okay. But
why is it not possible that they were working on it in a low security lab? You would concede that level 2 lab where something like that should not have been worked on. Yeah. And then they had a moment when it got out, and an international pandemic was begun.
The idea that people like Peter Daszak and Ralph Baric were involved in some conspiracy with Zhengli Shi at the Wuhan Institute of Virology to create SARS-CoV-2. It just did not happen that way. I know there are a lot of people.
Again, you're setting us a straw man. You do better if you would straw man my argument than straw man it. I'm not saying that they had a conspiracy to create this particular virus. I'm saying they were doing bat coronavirus research, gain of function research that was very dangerous, and it was not properly supervised in a lab with adequate security, which is what has led many of us to think something went wrong.
Right, but they would have had to. They would have had to have a virus that was close to SARS-CoV-2 there. Now, I'm going to tell you something here. And, the virus didn't emerge directly from a bat to a person, okay? It had to go through an intermediate animal. It had to enter some other mammal besides a bat in order to evolve into SARS-CoV-2. And the people at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they were working on bat coronaviruses. And so, that's a whole different thing. And that's another piece of data, another piece of evidence that, they didn't engineer this virus. And again.
Well, no, but they had mice with humanized lungs. Mm-hmm. And they were using those mice to test how contagious they could make this, how they could improve the efficiency of the contagion. That's not true? They didn't have mice with humanized lungs?
Yeah, and those mice are available. ACE2 mice, they're available all over. A lot of people do work on those kind of mice. And
so why are we pretending that there wasn't a way of making?
We've got a pandemic coronavirus that uses that for a receptor.
I'm just saying, of course, this is what people think, that there absolutely was a way of making the coronavirus more dangerous and more contagious in this lab. And if it happened in the natural origin, where's the intermediate animal? Where's the original animal? Where is even one pangolin? There's not one with over 80,000 animals tested.
It wasn't a pangolin, but, we do have evidence. And, we published these 2 peer-reviewed papers in Science magazine, several months ago. They went through a lot of strident peer review. And we showed, I think, conclusively, you can pick your modifier. It's dispositive. It's definitive, the language that we used in the paper was pretty direct. We showed that the Henan market, and we haven't mentioned that word before, but this wildlife market in the city of Wuhan was, the epicenter of the outbreak. All the early cases were
that it may have been the epicenter of the outbreak doesn't prove that was the source, that was the original source of the outbreak. Moreover, well, here's the second point. Moreover, my understanding is you guys, many people had the theory that this is where it began, the Wuhan market. And therefore, that's where all the testing was done in the hospitals around the Wuhan market in order to support your own theories, as opposed to casting a wide net to figure out where else it might have shown up.
Yeah, it's called the Henan market. It's the South China, seafood and wildlife market there, and it was one of only 4 places in the city of Wuhan. This mega city, 11 million people there. That one of only 4 places that sold wildlife that are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2. So this is where where all the early cases were centered, and it's not ascertainment bias or anything like that. You'll probably hear that, a little bit later on, I'm guessing, but this was actually a study that was done, after the outbreak had started. They looked at all the different cases, across the whole city of Wuhan, these 11 million people, and identified, cases of SARS-CoV-2 in December of 2019. Okay, so about 170 cases or so. And it turns out that, we were able to look at that data and show that those cases were centered, not just in any place in this large city of over 500 square miles, but in a very tiny area that included, at its very center, the Henan seafood market. So, and this included people, and this is important. So when you talk about ascertainment bias about these cases, it included not only the cases that were epidemiologically or, by, contacts linked to the Henan market, but also cases that were not linked, that the epidemiologists couldn't find any link at all. And it turns out that those cases too, without the link to the market, were also, very close in that same community around the Henan seafood market. So what happened is the virus spilled over, from the wildlife trade in that market. And it didn't happen just once, it happened twice, because there are 2 different lineages of the virus, which is a whole nother piece of evidence that,
But here's the question here's the question lay people are asking.
Yeah.
Where's the animal? Show us one. Show us one.
I mean, the data that we looked at and that we published on our science papers goes even deeper. When they closed down that market, and they closed it down on January 1st, they took environmental samples from the market. Now, all the wild animals had already been cleared out of the market, right? But there were still environmental swabs and things that they took. And they took them from around the different parts of the market. And when those environmental samples were tested for the presence of the virus, most of those samples ended up being clustered in one particular area of the market, the southwest corner. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that the southwest corner was where they were selling these wild animals that are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2. So,
but the truth is, Dr. Garry, let me follow up. The truth is, you don't know that those samples originated with animals as opposed to infected humans.
Well, technically you're correct about that, but I'll tell you the samples that were positive came from places in the market where they were selling the wild animals. One of the samples came from an iron cage that they kept the animals in. The sewer out in front of that stall where they were selling the wild animals turned out later to be positive for SARS-CoV-2. So it's all in this just one tiny corner of this market that the west side of the market that's about the size of a U.S. football field, maybe more like a soccer.
So you don't find it odd we haven't found a single animal that would be the source or the intermediary?
No, I don't find it odd. And there's reasons for that. I mean, scientific reasons why I think that it's been difficult. First of all, they cleared all the animals out of the market. So, call me a conspiracy theorist if you want, but I think that, the Chinese government didn't want us linking the virus to the wildlife trade, because that's how the first SARS started, right? I mean, it started from spillover, and multiple spillovers from wild animals back in 2002 to 2004.
Okay, I accept that the Chinese had reasons to hide.
They cleared the market of those wild animals out, and then so the animals are gone, and then we have not been able to get any data or information from the Chinese authorities there, about what the supply chains were.
Okay, I get it, but don't the Chinese have more of a reason to say it came from an animal than they do to say it came from the Wuhan lab?
I don't think so.
Because the Chinese, let's be clear. When the virus emerged in Wuhan, the scientists did not share their database of the wildlife pathogens with the public or even with their American collaborators. They didn't do it. This has been created precisely to help scientists in the event of this kind of an outbreak. Yes. So why, when the pandemic finally hit, did they not share it? Why wouldn't we know where these viruses were and how they were kept in their database that they would, and why haven't they been shared with the public? Why? Doesn't that cause you some concern?
I think that's just another part of it. A lot of conspiracy theories. I mean, this mysterious database.
That. It's a question. Why? Tell me, what would be the non-conspiracy theorist reason for them not to share the data?
Well, what they said is that they were going to try to modernize it and make it more accessible to to other scientists. It was basically an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, excellent. Well, we're 3 years into this now.
So
where's the new pamphlet?
So they could update it, and then they got all the flack about it, and they just said, "Heck, no, we're not going to put it out."
It's been 3 years.
Huh?
I see. So now they're being spiteful because they were going to do it according to you originally. But 3 years later, they're just ticked off, and so they won't. Okay. Yeah. Do you agree that this would have easily escaped from a lab that only had BSL-2 or BSL-3 security on it? If they were working on a virus like this, those levels of security are too low.
I agree that, we should change those rules and work on some of these, wild coronaviruses, wild-caught coronaviruses at BSL-3. I mean, I'm a virologist. I mean, my safety, my personal safety and the safety of my students depends on having good biosafety and biosecurity. So we're not opposed to that. I mean, the rules are not written down very well, but, it's a separate conversation that we need to have. I mean, just because you think there might have been unsafe conditions there at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and I don't think that there were. I think that they were operating at a very high level. Doesn't mean that the virus leaked from there. That's an entirely different question, and it should be a separate.
No, but my problem is not. I'm not saying it does mean that. I'm saying I'm concerned about your lack of curiosity and the lack of curiosity of others like you who originally said this looks like a lab leak. And then 48 hours after speaking with Fauci and Collins did a 180. And it wasn't just you. You mentioned some of the others. Sir Farrar, who not only reversed himself, but started calling people racist for saying it was a lab leak. That's what concerns me, the absence of curiosity and open-mindedness to a full-throated investigation.
I've been doing a lot of other things in my career, looking at other viruses besides SARS-CoV-2, but there have been very few other people, besides me that have not been looking at this question so intently, for 3 years. And I can assure you, if we had found any scintilla of evidence that the virus had leaked from the lab, we'd be out there, sharing it with people and showing that, okay, that's happened. But, there's no scientific evidence. There's nothing that points.
Let me ask you this.
A lot of things.
You said earlier that you did not feel.
Yeah.
You said earlier you did not feel pressured by Fauci or Collins to reverse your opinion from lab leak to natural origins.
No.
Did you have a conversation in which either one of them expressed that they thought this would be harmful to the scientific community if it looked like a lab leak?
Never heard that from them.
Never once. No. Neither one ever said that or suggested that in any way, shape, or form to you?
No.
Did anybody suggest to you that was how they felt?
I never heard it until I saw it on the news there, and I didn't think too much of that.
So none of your fellow scientists told you that, like Fauci and Collins or anybody at the NIH?
Nobody put any pressure on us.
This is not good.
At all. No, absolutely not.
Well, that's not what I asked.
Yeah. Whatever your answer is, we didn't hear anything from Fauci or Collins that said, okay, it's going to hurt international relations or anything like that. Nothing. Totally categorically.
Okay, but are you familiar with those? I mean, you know now that they've said that publicly.
I mean, we published that paper in March of 2020. I think that quote that you read was from Collins sometime in April. That was the first time I heard about it. I'm not sure if it was the New York Times or where it was, but or maybe it was when maybe it even was later. But I never heard about it.
I mean, it wasn't just them. It was some of your collaborators. It was Collins saying, we've got to tamp down the very destructive conspiracy about the lab leak theory. Otherwise, it would do great potential harm to science and international harmony. Then there was Dr. Ron Faucier, whose group in the Netherlands researches how to make animal viruses more dangerous, who said in an email, further debate about such accusations around the lab leak theory would unnecessarily distract top researchers from their active duties and do unnecessary harm to science in general and science in China in particular. China, which is America's biggest and most important collaborator in scientific research. Yeah. This is why people believe that everyone, you, Fauci, Collins, Faucier, all these people understood it is not good if we start pointing a finger at that Wuhan lab.
Megyn, it wasn't me. I didn't say that. I mean, I'm not a particular fan of the Chinese government. I think that they should be more open about, these early cases and, where the animals came from and a lot of other things. And so, don't quote me on that. I never said that. I can't speak for these other people.
Well, you did say you thought it was natural. You did not think it was natural origin. You couldn't figure out how it was. That's from you.
I said that in one email. I mean, that was like, amongst thousands of other things.
What do you mean? So did you lie in that email? I mean, is that how you felt or isn't it?
No, I didn't lie. I mean, this is how scientists, work things out. Sometimes you take one side of the argument and sometimes you take the other side. And, that's what we were doing. And that's another reason why, when we had this, February 1 teleconference that, I think the NIH feels it's important to keep those confidential discussions private because, people can cherry pick. And that's what's happened. They cherry picked that one email from me and, said, okay, he's a lab leaker and he always was. And he changed his mind in 24 hours and all this kind of stuff. And, it's just not, doesn't reflect what the actual discussions that were going on were, and you want to have.
I must say though, it wasn't just cherry picked or leaked.
Right?
As I pointed out, Sir Farrar wrote a whole book telling us what your positions were. So it's not just like some nefarious character got a hold of some notes. Like the whole books have been written about it. Like your colleagues are on the records on this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, some of the people that you mentioned that can be considered the original lab leakers. And we included the lab leak hypothesis in our Nature Medicine article. I mean, if you carefully read it, it's not even, you don't have to carefully read it. It's right there. We considered it. I read it. We considered it, but, we had to look at the scientific evidence, and there is no scientific evidence that the virus leaked from that lab.
Okay, here's the final thing I want to ask you about.
Okay.
You and another one of the early
I haven't
lab
convinced
leak.
you yet, have I?
No, you haven't, but I appreciate you coming on and being so honest. I mean, I give you credit, Dr. Garry, because nobody else was willing to do this. And so just the fact that you're willing to sit here and take these tough questions makes me think more of you, makes me understand better your position.
I've had questions before.
I'm sure you have. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm doing the best I can. And so I appreciate you giving me the time.
I give you credit
and my
for
audience the time. But here's the thing that, that also got a lot of attention, that you and this Christian Anderson, who was also
Christian Anderson,
more in the lab leak. Say again?
Christian.
Okay, sorry. Christian Anderson, you guys were both more in the lab leak theory originally and then reversed yourselves.
Christian, yes, not me.
Well, whatever. The record stands. It speaks for itself.
Okay.
And then within a couple of months, in August of 2020, you guys received an $8.9 million grant from Fauci to study emerging infectious diseases. And Fauci is the guy who controls the purse strings when it comes to these federal grants on research. And this is why everyone in your community is so beholden to him. So do you deny that you felt some pressure to make Fauci happy?
Yeah, I do deny it. I mean, and let me tell you, yes, the grant was finally awarded in August, but that grant was written in the middle of 2019, and it was reviewed, by peer review studies.
So you knew it was under consideration when you had the conversations with him about lab leak theory.
Tell me again, I didn't quite catch the first word.
You're saying it wasn't granted until later, but you had applied earlier. So what you're telling me is that when you had the conversation with Fauci about your belief it was a lab leak theory initially, your grant was under consideration.
Nope, it had already been awarded, and so,
I thought you got it in August of 2020. What happened in August 2020?
I mean, it takes a long time for him to set up all these contracts and everything like that. And, Dr. Fauci doesn't review these grants, and he doesn't decide which grant is going to be funded and not funded.
Neither does
Francis Collins. No, they don't.
You're suggesting that Dr. Fauci couldn't stop it if he wanted it. If he wanted to stop it, he could have. He's done it before.
It'd actually probably be hard for him to do it. There are people that could stop it, but I'm not sure that Dr. Fauci could actually stop it. There are others that could, but not him. But it's peer review. I mean, we competed against a bunch of other very, good scientists and groups and things like that, wrote a good proposal, and, the study section liked it. And, it was reviewed by the Scientific Council of the NIH, which is another independent group of scientists. And they said, yes, award this grant. And that happened before anybody knew about SARS-CoV-2.
Research grant.
So it wasn't,
I'm not saying it's a bad
as some
grant.
people have said, and the name of the project is, the whole program is called CREED, Centers for Research in Emerging Infectious Diseases. It wasn't a creed pro quo or anything like that. That's just insulting. And the people that, have made those accusations know that that's not true. They're just, throwing out, whatever they think might stick on the wall. And it didn't happen that way.
Dr. Robert Garry, you're a stand-up guy for coming on. I appreciate it. Thank you for the robust back and forth.
All right. Sure enough.
Coming up, Dr. Alina Chan, who has been watching this entire interview and is ready to respond. Don't go away. You ever wonder if your vitamins are working? Clinical studies show Healthy Cell's new ingestible gel technology called microgel delivers maximum nutrient absorption, 165% more than tablets. And it tastes great. It's hard to make vitamin liquids or gels taste good naturally, but Healthy Cell products are the best tasting pill-free supplements on the market. Go pill-free and get up to 15 pills worth of nutrients in one ultra absorption gel pack, saving you money and time and giving you effective doses. Take a single great tasting gel pack at home or on the go. It's great for travel. You can mix it into drinks or blend it into smoothies. Old-fashioned tablets, capsules, and powders contain synthetic other ingredients like binding glues. Who wants a glue in their tablet? Flow agents. I don't even want to know. Fillers and coatings that could irritate your gut. Plus, this is made in the USA. Visit healthycell.com/Megyn, MEGYN, or just use that code Megyn for 20% off your very first order. Now, Dr. Alina Chan, a molecular biologist and scientific advisor at MIT and Harvard, who co-wrote Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19, a book that explains why she says the science points to COVID originating in the Wuhan lab. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you were listening to my exchange with Dr. Garry, and well, let me just start with this. What did you make of it? What did you think of it?
I wish that we had been able to talk face to face, because there's so many things I would have liked to put to him that I hope we can
wanted
get
that,
into.
But that was not acceptable. Yeah. Keep going. So yeah, we'll keep going. So that was short of that. Like, what did you make of his assertion? I mean, number one, he was saying that this type of virus has been seen. He conceded not in SARS-type coronaviruses. Never before was there this furin cleavage site, which again has been described by some as the smoking gun that tells us it came from a man in a lab or a woman. He says, okay, maybe not in the SARS-type coronaviruses, but these do occur in nature, and that we have seen this type of thing appear in other type of coronaviruses.
So the first thing I'll say is that without this cleavage site, without this feature, this virus would never have caused a pandemic. So without this feature, it is completely weak. It's very not transmissible and not very deadly. So the problem is that you have scientists in this one lab in Wuhan who in 2018 said, we're going to put these types of features into SARS-like viruses. And boom, 2 years later, such a virus shows up in their city. So it's a very striking coincidence. And the problem is that when people say there's no evidence they did that, that's because the evidence exists in lab records, emails, and documents, things that we don't have access to and things we should be investigating. So I'm hopeful that next year there will be an actual investigation where these documents are obtained from their US collaborators and the EcoHealth Alliance that can shed light on whether or not it happened and whether or not the virus came from that lab.
What did you make of the reversal of all those scientists in 48 hours? They all came out initially and had this conference call saying it looks like it came from a lab, cannot figure out how this could have been natural. And his explanation, which is the first time he's said it publicly, about what changed his mind in the 48 hours.
So I think this paper, this Nature Medicine proximal origin letter, is a case study in lack of transparency in scientific publishing. So they did not acknowledge that their scientific funders had been involved. They didn't say that, hey, we had this phone call, Ferrer, Fauci, Collins were on it, and there was this long discussion with multiple other scientists, and we ruled out a lab leak. So they didn't acknowledge their involvement, and yet months later, when Dr. Fauci was telling the media that this couldn't have come from a lab, he just whipped out this paper and said, hey, look at this paper. Independent scientists said it couldn't have come from a lab. So this is not very transparent.
He claims that in that 48 hours, the aha moment was looking at the virus appearing in another, forgive me, I think he was talking about another pangolin coronavirus thing that had a similar, I don't know if it's exactly a furin cleavage site, but something where he was like, you see, it has occurred, and that was the game-changing moment.
So I was listening to that exchange, and I think his stance is quite scientifically naive. So he said that from looking at the pangolin coronavirus, which has no furin cleavage site or any sign of intermediate in that site, he changed his mind. He said because parts of that virus look similar to the pandemic virus, we can assume that the rest of the pandemic virus is natural too. So how can you make that assumption? That doesn't make any sense from a logical point of view. So I don't accept this. I don't accept this excuse that they looked at the pangolin virus and within 48 hours they changed their minds. They could not dismiss the most concerning feature to them, which was the furin cleavage site.
What did you make of, he says that he did not feel pressured or was not told by Fauci or Collins would be very helpful if you would reverse your original position. To me, it just remains very suspicious that they all did, that they were all very strongly. I mean, we're talking about 80, 90% people saying that their position is 80% sure this could not have come from an animal. And then suddenly a 180 to the point where not only were they saying, actually, it did come from an animal, and you're racist to suggest it didn't. I mean, a real reversal. To me, that's very suspicious. But what do you think?
So this is one reason why scientific journals say that scientists, when you write letters and you publish articles, you have to tell us if your funders were involved. You have to declare it. But these guys did not declare that their funders were involved. So they were receiving funding from NIH, from NIAID, from the Wellcome Trust, and they did not declare that the leaders of these funding agencies were involved in their manuscripts. They had sent these manuscripts to them, drafts of it, to get their advice. They thanked them in emails for their leadership and advice. And again, the paper was cited to the media by these leaders as if they had no involvement in it. So this is not transparent. And I think it is actually very anti-scientific to come up with a letter and say, case closed, no need to investigate. We, the scientists, the virologists, have decided for everyone that a lab leak cannot happen and we don't need to look into it.
Yeah, and then as I pointed out to the doctor, you have Collins on the record saying, I really hoped this Nature Medicine piece would put an end to this, but the speculation goes on. What more should we do? And Fauci saying, oh, it's a shiny object, it's going to go away. The lab leak discussions after that Brett Baer segment that Collins was circulating around. So, I mean, it's very clear that they did have a plan. Whether, Dr. Garry knew about it is something the viewers can decide, and he denies it. But it's very clear that Fauci and Collins were working together to do everything within their power to tamp down the discussion about a lab leak. I'll ask you right after this quick break, because Alina stays with us, but I got to get a break at the end of the hour. I'll ask you whether, why were Fauci and Collins so determined to get people off of the lab leak theory, a position they seem to be in to this day. Pick it up right there, right after this. Alina, thank you for being with us. Stand by. The holidays, when our waists get bigger and our wallets get smaller. It's the season when most companies want you to spend all your money. But Good Ranchers wants to help you save in a season of spending. Beef prices are estimated to increase another 20% early in 2023, continuing the largest price spike on meat in recent U.S. history. Good Ranchers is letting you lock in your price on all the meat you buy this November when you subscribe during their Black Friday savings. With my code, Megyn, you can get their exclusive Black Friday offer of 2 free Black Angus New York strip steaks. You will inflation-proof your meat budget, get $70 of free USDA choice steaks, and save an additional $25 on every box when you subscribe. Thousands of 5-star reviews show why so many people are ditching the high prices and low quality of their grocery store for Good Ranchers instead. Treat yourself or someone you love to Good Ranchers' award-winning service and quality this holiday season. Remember to visit goodranchers.com/Megyn or just use that code Megyn when you check out to grab their best offer of the year. Black Angus is one of the premium breeds of cattle for high-quality beef, so don't have a normal Black Friday this year. Have yourself a Black Angus Friday with 2 free steaks from Good Ranchers. American meat delivered. First, let me pick up where I left off and ask you why you think Collins and Fauci were so determined to have the public narrative be natural origins.
I want to make 2 points. So the first is that the science has been clear since day one, since early 2020 until today, is that there's no definitive, no direct evidence for either a natural or a lab origin. Although in my view, in my scientific opinion, I think that the circumstantial evidence that exists, it points towards a lab origin. And this is why we need to investigate both. And the second point I want to make is that as this pandemic has gone on, the stakes have gotten higher and higher with the death toll and the impact on the economy. So at the beginning, it infected a few dozen people in Wuhan, but now we're talking about millions of people dead. And I think that scientists, journalists, and investigators are rightly worried that if they dig too deep on this issue, they might find out that this pandemic came from research activities. So research that was a collaboration between the US and China, and thus implicating a whole coalition of scientists across the world who are engaged in this type of risky research. And it's so much easier to point the finger at the nameless, voiceless market trader in Wuhan and say that that guy with the raccoon dogs did it, and he can't defend himself. And that way, you don't actually blame anyone. You don't need to blame anyone for this pandemic. You don't need to do anything to prevent a future pandemic. And this is the real problem, is that by failing to investigate how this pandemic started, we have left the door wide open for more of this high-risk virology research to continue. Although it's such a tiny fraction of virology, it has outsized consequences for humanity.
Yeah, well said. Exactly right. And yet Fauci just granted Peter Daszak's group another multi-million-dollar grant to continue gain-of-function research. It's incredible to me, Doctor.
That is very shocking. So when I saw that news, I was thinking to myself, what have they done to investigate, to make sure that the research they funded through the EcoHealth Alliance didn't result in this pandemic? And what changes have they made? How have they made the research safer, more accountable, and more transparent? I have no idea. So we're just pouring more money into the type of activity that could start pandemics.
Yeah, because Dr. Garry kept saying, there's no proof they engineered this in this lab. Yes, some people think this was an intentional act, but I think the vast majority of people who are thinking lab leak don't think this was intentional. They think that they were doing gain-of-function research in that Wuhan lab on bat coronaviruses to see how dangerous we could make them and how we might combat them, and that something went wrong, that there was a low-level security in this lab, something went wrong. And while they didn't try to engineer this pandemic, that wound up being the consequence.
Yes, I actually have a very charitable view of the research happening in that lab. So I don't believe that they were intentionally trying to make pandemic pathogens. They tried to do their work in very weak viruses, but I think by accident, they might have put in a pandemic feature that made one of these weak viruses capable of starting a human pandemic. And the issue here is that they were doing a lot of this work in the years leading up to the pandemic at a very low biosafety level. So you had asked Bob Garry, was it appropriate for them to do this type of research at BSL-2, and Bob said he thought it was a high enough level of biosafety. That is just not true. So you cannot be working with novel SARS-like viruses at BSL-2. If you do this for several years and you're working with hundreds of these SARS-like viruses, one day you're going to get unlucky.
Right. So what about his point? He was saying all the cases originated around the Wuhan market, and that in that market, they found traces of the coronavirus in this particular section where the animals were kept.
There are a few facts that need to be pointed out about this market. So the first thing is that this market is the size of about 10 NFL stadiums. Okay, 10 NFL stadiums, the retail space in that market, and it's located in one of the most densely populated districts in Wuhan City, where most of the elderly people live. It's located right next to the Wuhan CDC and several hospitals, key hospitals in that city. It's also located next to the most highly trafficked metro train station in that city. So by the time the investigators went there, the entire market, 10 NFL stadiums, had been plastered with virus. So Bob Garry says that he thinks that based on the available data, which is very little, he thinks that there's evidence of contamination near the wildlife stores. But if you look at it closely, actually the washrooms in the the toilets in that market are right there. So he and his collaborators on this peer-reviewed science paper he keeps pointing to actually admit in the paper itself, we don't have the data, but we're going to make a bunch of assumptions that support our belief that this came from the market, and we're going to tell everyone that we've found the animal at this market. So I think those studies cannot stand if they were truly opened up for open peer review by other scientists.
What do you make of his assertion? Because I said, where's the animal? Where's even one? They tested 80,000 and they're not there. And he said the Chinese got rid of them, in an effort to cover it up, that they didn't want the news narrative to be they came from a lab, which, from the Wuhan market.
So I agree that China now has a stance that they don't want any evidence at all that this virus originated in China. It's an anywhere but here stance. So they're trying to blame it on lobsters from Maine. They're trying to blame it on cold chain from Southeast Asia. They're trying to blame it on salmon from Faroe Islands, this kind of thing. Everyone who sees that knows it's a farce, right? So, but what Bob Garry is saying is that in all of the years, even before the pandemic, the scientists who have been studying the wildlife and the bats all around that area and other parts of China have not been able to find any animals infected with SARS-2-like viruses, except for pangolins far down in South China. They have not found any bats in the area that carry this type of viruses. And so he's saying that all of that evidence must have been covered up. Either that or we have been exceedingly unlucky that suddenly a virus with this furin cleavage site just pops up, boom, and leaves no trace across the rest of China in the years leading up to or after the pandemic. So it requires a massive conspiracy across tons of scientists, wildlife traders, hospitals, like the government. So I think that conspiracy is much less plausible than the lab leak theory.
Well, let's talk about the lab leak theory now and explain to us why you believe, and I understand your initial point, which is there's no definitive evidence in either camp. There's circumstantial evidence and people will draw their own conclusions, but it really is outrageous that we're not having an international open investigation into this with so many people dead. I mean, millions of people dead, 10 plus. In any event, why do you believe that this came from a lab?
So I think that the odds are extremely striking. So in the entire world, this was the only lab that was collecting all of these novel coronaviruses from not just bats, but wildlife in the wildlife trade, from even people in the wildlife trade. So they're actively collecting samples from people who reported illnesses, mysterious illnesses, and they worked in wildlife trade, bringing all these samples up from Southeast Asia and China across 8 countries up into Wuhan city. They had the ability to seamlessly engineer these in the lab, genetically modify them in the lab, leaving no trace of detection. They also had this 2018 pipeline to put furin cleavage sites into SARS-like viruses. So there's only this one lab in the world doing this type of work at not safe conditions, so at a low biosafety condition. And 2 years later, this virus shows up in that city. So you have to investigate. And their behavior has really not been very forthcoming. So these guys said, we're going to put horns on horses. A unicorn shows up in their city. And they describe everything about this unicorn except for the horn. And they don't tell anyone about their plans to put horns on horses until late last year. Someone finally leaked the document from the US government showing that these guys had this plan all this time. And none of them said a word, not even the US collaborators.
All right, when you refer to the plan, are you referring to Peter Daszak's application to the defense, to the Pentagon, asking for funding to do exactly this kind of research, this kind of gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses?
Yes, and other top virologists have looked at this document too and said this could have plausibly led to the creation of the pandemic virus. So my question is, why aren't we investigating? Why aren't we asking the EcoHealth Alliance and other US collaborators on that grant, what other research happened under this arm of work? Did you actually start doing this work? What were the communications that you got from your Wuhan partners?
Okay, and what about the defense of, well, the Pentagon rejected that. They did not fund that, and so what makes you believe it took place?
So this is another scientifically naive point that Bob Garry made. He said just because they didn't get the money, they couldn't do the work. That is, I think, incorrect on so many levels, because this lab in Wuhan was extremely highly funded. They had so much money pouring in that not getting one grant from DARPA in the US would not have stopped them from doing any work, especially an idea that was very exciting, considered transgressive, most likely able to lead to a high-impact publication. So, and a lot of scientists, when they write these grants, they've usually done some preliminary work already. And the wording in this grant was so specific. It said, we're going to look in all of the viruses we've collected to see if there are any types of rare cleavage sites. And we're going to put these into SARS-like viruses in the lab. So I think that it is wishful thinking on Bob Garry's part. He wishes that they had not done any of this work so that it could have just come from that market.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that's really suspicious is the fact that this virus arrived in humans super efficient and great at being at contagion, great at it, passing from one to another. And that's very rare, as I understand it, with these coronaviruses, SARS coronaviruses. The viruses typically take a long time to get this efficient, this good. And that's why, I was asking him about the humanized mice in the lab, because that is how we understand they were doing it. They were using these humanized mice to make the virus more transmissible. So
Garry and his co-authors, they make some fairly outlandish assertions. They claim that they know that the precursor to the pandemic virus was never worked with in that lab. And my question is, how do you know? Did you have access to their database and you're not sharing it with us? I
asked him that.
Yeah, there's usually a lag of a few years. Some labs even work on projects for 10 years before publishing. And we know that Wuhan Institute of Virology had a very strict confidentiality protocol. Some of their theses had to be locked for 20 years. So someone's PhD project.
You heard his answer on that. You heard his answer. They were originally going to do it. They're getting it together, but then they got ticked off and they were like, forget it. You're going to blame us. You're not getting anything.
I don't understand what he means by modernizing an Excel sheet. So, can't you just share the Excel sheet with your US collaborators? The people who gave you millions of dollars over the years to build this database to predict pandemics. So this is another example where I feel like their behavior has been suspicious and not forthcoming, illogical, really. And so it really is.
The mice.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. So,
so if you could comment on the mice and how we believe they were, because there's a reason that we find its efficiency and contagion so suspicious.
Yeah, and Garry and his colleagues have also flip-flopped on that point a lot. So first, in proximal origin, they said this virus is very well adapted for humans. And then when I came out with the same idea, they attacked me saying she's wrong, she's not qualified to comment. And then this year in their preprint, they said the same thing again. They said it's well adapted, and that's why it cause such an explosion from 2 spillovers at the market. So they can't make up their minds. But for me, it's quite clear that when a virus jumps from an animal to a human, it normally is not capable of causing a pandemic right away. It's like buying a lottery ticket. So if someone buys a lottery ticket for the first time in their life and they buy one lottery ticket and they win the lottery, that's kind of suspicious. It's not impossible, but it's very suspicious. Normally, for someone to win the lottery or for a virus to win the lottery, it has to try many times. It has to keep hitting, keep infecting people, keep jumping until one day it gets quite lucky and it causes a chain of transmissions enough to adapt well and cause a large outbreak in humans.
So what now, right? We've had our intelligence agencies take some sort of cursory look at this. The results were unsatisfying. We've had the World Health Organization with Peter Daszak on the board go over there to try to get answers. Even 60 Minutes caught on to that and gave Peter Daszak a hard time and basically said this is not to be trusted. What now? Because as I mentioned to Dr. Garry, the U.S. and China are neck deep in collaborative research with one another. And as you point out, this is essentially the reason why our public health officials are so determined not to lift up the drape on this particular investigation and get real answers. So we're worried. We're worried about the next pandemic and low security labs and more money going to Daszak.
So I wish that at the beginning of this pandemic, the scientists would have, instead of calling a lab leak theory a conspiracy or racist conspiracy theory, I wish that they would have said, look, even the best scientists have accidents and we are all kind of responsible for this. And the responsible thing for scientists to do is to say, let's investigate and make sure this doesn't happen again. But that's not what happened. And so here we are 3 years later with no real investigation, with no credible investigation. That study tour that the World Health Organization had in Wuhan last year was a desperate attempt to get data from the Chinese investigators. They did not get that data. So here we are. What can we do? I would say there is a lot we can do. There's data that exists here in the US that can be looked at that can actually tell us when did this start. So there might be sequences of the pandemic virus predating December 2019, and that has not been looked at. The database owners have not allowed scientists to go in and look. We have not subpoenaed unfortunately, we have to subpoena for emails and documents between the Wuhan scientists and the US collaborators to see did they actually start.
Meaning Daszak and EcoHealth?
Yes, the EcoHealth Alliance and their other US collaborators. So there's so many things we can look into, but have not been looked into.
Can I just ask you, Alina, this is so infuriating. We just gave EcoHealth and Peter Daszak several more $1 million. He got one portion of it now and he gets more later. Why can't Dr. Fauci just pick up the phone right now and say, give it all to me?
I don't know. I suspect that, again, there might be this feeling amongst scientists, especially top scientists, that they don't want to know the answer. That they would rather have these two science papers. They would rather have these 2 science papers, try to close the case for the entire scientific community, try to tell everyone, don't worry, we did the analysis and we're telling you this came from the market. They would rather that happen rather than investigate. And so you're exactly right that this has led to continued funding, continued investment in this type of research that could start more pandemics and have a catastrophic effect on the rest of us. So more risk on the general population, more vaccination programs, more lockdowns potentially. It's just unthinkable that there's not been a proper investigation.
That's the last question. The undermining in the public faith in our public health officials. It's been catastrophic. It trickles down to vaccines and everything else coming out of the CDC and the NIH and Fauci's subgroup within the NIH. I mean, it's all connected to the unwillingness to be transparent and open and honest about how this thing got started. Am I wrong?
So I believe that in this pandemic, the vaccines and therapeutics have played an immense role in reducing human suffering. I myself have taken all the vaccines and boosters, but I think that the scientific community has a responsibility not only to advocate the benefits of these countermeasures to pandemics, but to also say that, hey, when a pandemic starts in a city where there's this unique lab working with exactly the type of virus, we need to investigate so that in the future we don't have more of these ambiguous outbreaks happening, more of these necessary conditions to have vaccines and therapeutics on people. Like, I think that we don't want another pandemic, right? There's no one who wants another one of this happening in the city with a lab in it again.
Mm-hmm. It's like seeing Fauci and Collins hiding the smoking gun and then turning around saying, trust me to keep you safe. Come in, dine at my table. I've got you. I'm going to make sure you're safe and you're well. And you're like, can we just talk about what I saw you do over there? Because I don't know if I am safe in your hands and I've got questions. And so far, few real answers. Doctor, great to have you. Thanks for coming on. Alina Chan, everybody. To be continued. Dark Brandon, part 2. He was at it again last night in front of Union Station, of all places in Washington, D.C., where stores are closing left and right in this economy. We were joking yesterday with Josh Holmes. Why didn't he just do it in front of Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan? Why, so many places if you wanted to highlight some of his administration's problems. Union Station, I guess, fit the bill just fine. Here to discuss that and more, one of our favorite guests, Andrew Klavan, host of The Andrew Klavan Show and author of the newly released crime novel, A Strange Habit of Mind. And Andrew always keeps you turning the pages in his crime novels, is what he does now. One of the reasons he's a household name. Great to have you back. How are you?
Good to see you, Megyn. I'm doing great.
What did you make of Dark Brandon Part 2, saying this election is a battle between autocracy and democracy? If you vote for those Republicans, you're voting for autocrats. Yeah. You're not a Democrat. You don't believe in democracy.
Well, we're not just Republicans. We're now MAGA Republicans. They're going to keep adding adjectives to this until it goes right off the page. It's actually kind of an interesting moment. It really is, because not only did he accused Republicans of taking a hammer to Paul Pelosi, try to link that horrible attack on Pelosi to the Republicans and to January 6th and to Donald Trump. He basically says that the Republicans will destroy democracy by winning an election. And what's fascinating about this to me is that the media before the speech basically endorsed the speech. After the speech, endorsed the speech, basically saying, yes, this is right. This violence is coming distinctly out of the Republican camp. No violence from the Democrats, no 2020 riots, no, holding George Floyd up as a hero, none of that. Just January 6th is the only thing that ever happened. They're counting on this media dominance that they've had for so many years in an age when the internet is stripping that dominance away. And that's why you're also seeing at the same time this fight with Elon Musk to keep him from lifting the censorship rules that have silenced so many innocent conservative voices on Twitter. This is a fight about information. I mean, it's not just a fight about the election. Of course, it's a fight about the election. But what Biden is counting on is the old dominance that the left has had over our information systems and over our culture to uphold what is a lie. I mean, the idea that Republicans are somehow unique in denying the legitimacy of an election is ridiculous. Hillary Clinton denied the legitimacy of Trump's election. Adam Schiff did. They denied the legitimacy of George W. Bush's election. Stacey Abrams still thinks she's governor of Georgia, if not governor, emperor of her entire imagination. So they've called for violence. They've said there should be more violence in the street. Nancy Pelosi herself said there should be violence in the street. So they're really depending on their power to communicate this lie and to silence anybody who says, hey, you know what, if you look on YouTube, you can see Democrats doing the same things that some Republicans do. And I just don't think it's working. The polls show that it's not working. The polls are looking pretty good for the Republicans and a bad, very bad map for the midterms. And that means that we have reached a paradigm shift. We have reached a moment when, for all of our worries about information dominance, the right is fighting back and it's starting to win.
Oh, that is fascinating. That's such an interesting take on it, that their whole plot is falling apart. The thing that always worked for them is not working. Because you're right, this January 6th thing is all they've got. They've been shoving that and abortion. That's all they've been shoving on us for months now, and it's not getting the job done. And so what does he decide to do? He decides to double down on one of those failed narratives. To me, it's interesting. First of all, a word on MAGA. I was thinking, is it like MAGA Trump? And then I'm like, what if they called me MAGA? I'd be Megyn MAGA. Like, if you like alliteration. Or maybe it'd be MAGA Megyn. I don't know. In any event. So he goes out there and he just doubles down on what's already not working. And to me, it reminded me of, we ran a clip up from MSNBC last week where they got together a Democrat and a Republican and an independent, and they were asking them about the threat to democracy. And these three were like, the January 6th thing, like, Anyway, back to inflation. And then Vox just had the same kind of reporting. They did this. They went out and talked to voters. Like, what do you care about? What about January 6th? They were like, but the economy, yeah, let's talk, right? And so what does he do? He goes out there last night and once again is back to Republicans, mega MAGA. And as you point out, this really low moment with Paul Pelosi. Let's run that. It's SOT 4.
The assailant ended up using a hammer to smash Paul's skull. The assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol on January the 6th, when they broke windows, kicked in the doors, brutally attacked law enforcement, roamed the corridors, hunting for officials, and erected gallows to hang the former Vice President, Mike Pence. It was an enraged mob.
Wow. I didn't hear any mention of Steve Scalise, who was shot by a Bernie Sanders loving fan who wasn't even said to be a lunatic, who was said to just be this rabid, murderous man. I didn't hear any mention of Lee Zeldin, Republican candidate for governor of New York, who they attempted to stab on stage just 2 months ago, right? Like, it's all about what happened to Paul Pelosi because he thinks because they yelled, "Where's Nancy?" At the January 6th riot, they can tie that to this guy going into Nancy Pelosi's house saying, "Hey, where's Nancy?" Okay.
There was a shooting outside Lee Zeldin's house, and the press asked Zeldin to come out and talk about it. So he came out, and the first question is, why are you politicizing this incident? And I think that it reminds me of the last scene of Singing in the Rain, where they pull back the curtain and you find out that the villainous woman actually has somebody dubbing her voice. That's the way the media has been all these years. It has been basically dubbing the voice of the Democrats, and it's gotten worse and worse as they've lost control of the narrative. I mean, the internet is like the invention of the printing press. It really is. It has spread information to places that the people in power don't want it to go. That's exactly what happened when the printing press came out. That's where the Reformation began. That's where all the religious wars began. And now we have this moment when not the dominant religion, but the dominant elite are basically being exposed, and they're being exposed for having their own agenda, for propping up their own power at the expense of ordinary people. One of the things that always makes me laugh in a sort of morbid way is when Democrats specifically try to tell us that the economy is good. And, you're sitting there trying to figure out how you're going to make your salary stretch to take in the inflation that they've caused with this fantastic narrative about climate emergency. So we have to get rid of our energy independence and become the slaves of oil-rich tyrants for this emergency that actually doesn't exist. The science actually shows that this is not an existential threat. And then when you can't afford to feed your kids, you can't afford to get them new clothes, they come and tell you, no, inflation's fine. Don't worry about inflation. Worry about abortion. Go like, well, I have 6 kids. Abortion is not on the table. I just want to feed them. Yeah, but don't worry about that. They depend always on this kind of fantasy world that they were able to create for several decades by owning not just the news media, but also the entertainment media and the academy and the publishing industry. And all of that is just starting to tremble and shake. And that's why you're seeing this kind of hysteria on the left. And that hysteria is, it is the real threat of where violence comes from. If you have people who are telling the New York Times, don't tell us the truth about Biden's dementia. That happened the other day. The New York Times actually reported on the fact that Biden's difficulties with keeping the facts straight are getting worse and worse. And they were just excoriated by their own readers. Don't tell us this. Don't tell the truth when there's an election on the line. And so when you have all these people who are suddenly being exposed to ideas they've never heard before, the thing is, Megyn, you and I know everything the left thinks because we're surrounded by them. We see them all the time. They don't even know we exist. They don't even know we have opinions that they might agree with. They don't even know that we have thoughtful, nuanced opinions, that we don't follow our leaders off cliffs, that we actually sometimes disagree with them. They have no idea because they never see us. They never see us on their media. They don't want to see us in the New York Times. They only see us attacked. And when that wall breaks down, there is going to be hell to pay. And it might be Tuesday. It might actually begin on Tuesday. But that wall is already becoming very permeable, that wall of information. This is a major thing. This is a major shift from one epoch to a new epoch. And that's why everything's so unsettled. But I'm right now, I'm very optimistic, not just about the election, but about the age to come.
Well, another example of what you were just discussing was what they did to Dasha Burns at NBC when she had the nerve to say, hey, I sat down with John Fetterman, and in the prelude to the actual interview where he didn't have the closed captioning thing, he really didn't seem to be able to understand any of the small talk. And the left just descended on her. That is a totally appropriate thing for a reporter to add. It's color. It's another way in to understand the candidate. I 100% would have done that with anybody. And they attacked her. They said she was wrong. All these reporters came out and said, I interviewed him. Didn't happen. Now they look like fools because we saw him at the debate, barely being able to understand with the closed captioning. Dasha Burns is vindicated. She won't be getting an apology. But yeah, they do attack their own when any of them try to do honest reporting. And to your other point, Andrew, about the White House just continually telling us, there is no economic problem. First inflation was transitory. It doesn't exist. It's whatever. It's just you worried about your soul cycle. I don't remember how they tried to dismiss it, all the different ways. They sent out a tweet, this crazy tweet, I think it was yesterday, on Social Security benefits. Now, because of the law, Social Security benefits go up when inflation goes up. That was passed. I went back during President Nixon, I think. And so it's automatic because that's a fixed income. So the White House sends out a tweet that reads, it was on Tuesday, seniors are getting the biggest increase in their Social Security checks in 10 years through President Biden's leadership. Okay, so somebody there is a complete idiot.
but
I love it.
But here's the interesting thing. They took it back because Elon Musk is now in charge of Twitter. Yes. He allowed readers to fact check it and to say that's not the case. And that's why they took it down. And that's why they're panicked.
Now that it's Elon's Twitter, Twitter added a quote, added context. This never would have happened under the old regime at Twitter. Added context disclaimer underneath the tweet, noting that the increase was not an intentional decision on the part of the president's quote, seniors will receive a large Social Security benefit increase due to the annual cost of living adjustment, which is based on the inflation rate. President Nixon in 1972 signed into law automatic benefit adjustment tied to the consumer price index. And then the White House deleted the tweet because they're just so dumb. And then Karine Jean-Pierre, who probably wrote the tweet to begin with, was asked about it by a reporter. Here's how that went.
Was it removed because of the addition of the note, or was it removed because of the concern about the veracity of the message?
So it was, look, the tweet was not complete. Usually when we put out a tweet, we posted with context, and it did not have that context.
Once again, the tweet read, seniors are getting the biggest increase in their Social Security checks in 10 years through President Biden's leadership. That's not a context problem. That's what we call a lie.
Well, that's the other thing. Their big talking point is disinformation. This is the way they're trying to get control over the information flow, is by accusing the right of disinformation. But we think back on what they've done on social media, calling the Hunter Biden laptop story Russian misinformation, what Dr. Chan was just talking about on your show, this suppression of the idea that our research, our partially funded research, might have had something to do with the Chinese virus spreading. All of these things that they have done that are just lies and disinformation. And then they pick out some guy who's a conspiracy theorist who mouths off on the right, and they compare that to the United States government lying. It's not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so really it's this democratization of information that is driving them up the wall for one big reason, which is that their policies don't work. I mean, this is the thing. An election is essentially a job interview. A campaign is a job interview. And these guys have come into the room and said to the boss, yes, we're going to bankrupt your company. We're going to make all your employees hate one another. We're going to destroy your equipment, but we're in favor of abortion. So, you should hire us. And any employer is going to look at that and think, before we talk about abortion, let's talk about whether you can make my company any better. Well, if the company is the United States and they're trying to run it, you've got to be competent enough to make things run. And they are not, because their ideas don't work. It's really only since Obama that they have stopped changing their minds when the electorate tells them they're wrong. You remember Bill Clinton getting shellacked and saying, okay, we hear you. We're going to get rid of this healthcare idea. We're going to stop. We're going to move to the right. We're going to move to the center. Obama never did that. It was like he never changed. He was just an absolute engine moving forward. And now Joe Biden has taken that on, and he's not as talented a politician, and he's not getting away with it.
Well, I heard Gavin Newsom out there today or yesterday talking about how my party's getting killed on messaging. We're getting killed on message. We have the wrong message. This is how it goes, right? When they lose, because for whatever reason, the voters vote them out or things aren't looking good for them in the polls, it's we were off on the messaging, or the voters are as stupido. They're dumb. They're too dumb to know what's good for them. They're deplorables. Hillary Clinton revised that just the other day. They're deplorables who are too stupid to really be placed in charge of our republic. And so we need smarter voters, and by that we mean elite Democrats. Right. So this is a messaging problem is the latest thing. Like if people would just only understand. So what message should they be, right? Like how are they going to explain the inflation away? Like that's their problem is they have no good message on that.
Right. But notice, though, that's what they think about because they've been doing it all this time. This thing about slandering their opposition, which they've been doing now for 50 or 60 years, telling you you're racist. Even if you won't go to their stupid movies, they call you like homophobic or whatever, transphobic. Words that mean nothing, by the way. There's no such thing, for instance, as an Islamophobe. Nobody has an irrational fear of Islamic people. Nobody has an irrational fear of gay people or transgender people. We have questions and we have objections to things and to actions, and those things should be listened to and debated and talked about. But instead, all they
by the way, just to interject, nobody would accuse you of being anti-gay. Spencer, your son, who we both love, is openly gay and in a gay marriage. And I am definitely not anti-gay, but half my friends are gay and lesbian and in marriages. But that doesn't make me want to go see a gay orgy on film on the big screen for my entertainment.
And it doesn't mean that I'm not open to debating with people about what this means for our society and is it good and is gay marriage. These are all open questions that I think should be talked about by people of goodwill. They shouldn't be. We don't have to sling hate at each other, but we can at least debate these serious issues and these serious changes in our social structure. But no, it's always that we're phobic and we stink and our religion stinks and our country stinks and our country is racist. And then they wonder why they get Donald Trump. They wonder why people are angry. Why are those Republicans always so angry? You kick people in the face for 50, 60 years. You demean their values, you demean their lifestyle, you demean their opinions, and then you wonder why they hate you. That is why they only want the elite Democrats to vote, and why they think that if they lose, they have lost. Democracy is lost. They're the only people on earth who believe that democracy can be lost in an election. That is actually how democracy works. And sometimes you win.
That's what Tom Cotton was saying. Yeah. Tom Cotton was saying they're not afraid of democracy going away. They're afraid of democracy making them go away.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So they have been able to shame many Americans out of expressing their legitimately held viewpoints that are not racist or bigoted and so on, but they object to some of these things you mentioned. One area that they have not yet been able to take over has been the courts. The courts have been a pretty good stalwart, not entirely perfect by any means, but a pretty good stalwart against this woke agenda. And in particular now, we've got reason to believe in the Supreme Court, which is now 6-3 conservative liberal. And it's amazing. I haven't seen a court like this in my lifetime. I'm even before I offered more of my positions publicly, before I got this show, I was open about the fact that I was a more Federalist Society type lawyer. And that's the way I look at the law, more originalist in my thinking, more, Thomas and Scalia than Ginsburg and Stevens. In any event, that is one of the reasons why I have a lot of hope, because the Supreme Court is very conservative and it's very young. And I'm excited about that fact. Well, that takes us to Monday's argument on affirmative action at the university level. Two big cases going up in which this group is saying you've got to take race out of the consideration now in deciding who gets into these elite universities or any university. 25 years ago, the Supreme Court considered whether it was time then, and they said, it's going to be time. You're right. This is not actually constitutional. We feel very hinky about it, but we're going to find an exception and just say you can do it for like another maybe 20 years, just to like right the wrongs of the past. But it was kind of a made up decision. But now the court has been asked to take another look at it, and they're going to strike it down. They are, I'm listening to that argument, it's going away. They're going to say you can no longer consider race as one of the factors in deciding whether somebody gets in. And one of the justices, who was actually Ketanji Brown Jackson, was saying, well, I'm not comfortable with this because what about all the other factors that you can consider? In fact, I think we have that soundbite. Do we have that soundbite? In any event, she was basically saying, there's all these other things that you can consider when it comes to diversity. You can consider whether somebody's a veteran. You can consider, whether they're in a wheelchair. Why wouldn't you be able to consider race? And really the answer is because the Constitution says you can't if I say to somebody, I think your veteran status is a plus for you, that's not diminishing somebody who's not a veteran. But if you prioritize one racial group, there's another racial group that is definitely being deprioritized, and that's not constitutional. That's a problem. In any event, people are getting very upset over this, and we're going to get the illegitimate Supreme Court accusations once again. There was an amazing moment where Justice Alito asked the lawyers arguing to keep this legal about how does it work? Like a student comes in and says, I'm African American or I'm Native American. Do you check? And the answer was no, we accept, it's an honor system. He says, what if they say one grandfather was a member of protected class? Do you check? No, honor system. What if they say my great-grandfather? What if they say my great-great-grandfather? Like, how do we figure out who's in a protected class, racial class that you would protect and you would favor? He was kind of trying to get at this, and then had this amazing reference to what was very clearly Elizabeth Warren in Soundbite 10. Listen.
It's family lore that we have an ancestor who was an American Indian.
So I think in that particular circumstance, it would be not accurate for them to say based on...
I identify as an American Indian because I've always been told that some ancestor back in the old days was an American Indian.
Yeah, so I think in that circumstance, it would be very unlikely that that person was telling the truth.
That's 100% an Elizabeth Warren reference, is it not?
It's also a great soundbite because it strikes at the fact that race is really a degraded and stupid way to regard other people. To think about people in terms of their race. There are a few legitimate things you can say about racial differences, but very, very few, and we don't really know very much about it. And the things that we call races, like we have African Americans, that's not an actual race. And so it's so nonsensical, and it strikes at the very heart of the American project. It always has. My journey from left to right began with the Bakke decision. I remember the day when they talked about affirmative action, and I thought, well, the left is really out of ideas. And the reason they're out of ideas is because they've poured an immense amount of money into Great Society programs that have made the lives of Black people worse. And affirmative action makes the lives of Black people worse. It puts Black students into situations that they might not be qualified for simply because of the color of their skin, and increases their rate of failure and increases the number of Black students who get out of a difficult subject that they want to study and move into an easier subject in order to survive a school that they shouldn't have been in the first place.
Ones that don't pay as well. That's right. That's right. It is just like every other thing that pulls people out because of race. It just damages the people it's supposed to help. And the third thing about this that drives me insane is, of course, it is just so discriminatory against Asian people. Stanford University, I believe it was, just apologized to Jews for their discriminatory practices against them in the past, like 70 years ago, because they didn't want all those smart Jews coming in and taking all the places. Now, I'm glad they apologized just in time to start discriminating against Asians, because Asians are traditionally hardworking and intellectual, and they're coming in. I mean, my alma mater, Berkeley, is now heavily Asian. When I went there, I was startled by the Asian population. They want that, because they're thinking in terms of race, they want that to stop. And my feeling about this is like, you know what? If you can't see people like an American, that each person has his own life, his own individual, sacred, precious life that should be treated on its own. If you can't start to say merit is the thing that moves you forward, hard work is the thing that moves you forward, then go to some other country where they're racist. This is the whole American project, is to see if we can be a country based on an idea, based on a series of ideas that can take people in and turn them into Americans. That has been our standard idea really from the beginning, that we were not going to be a racist
country or a racially based country. And all the stuff that went on, the slavery and the Jim Crow and all that stuff was wrong because it violated the American idea. This violates the American idea too. There is no such thing as good racism. There is no such thing as opposite racism. It's all bad. We are made in the image of God and Almighty God. And the Bible doesn't say black people are made in the image of God or white people. It's all of us. And if we don't treat each other like that, the American project is over.
Well said. There is no such thing as good racism. I think it was Alina Chan who was saying, well, to be black in America means your chances of going to an underfunded and poor school at the elementary, K through 12 level is much higher. To have had certain disadvantages built in, I know it's higher. Making no distinction, by the way, between, what about black immigrants? Do they get all the advantages? Or what if you're black but you're not descended from slaves? No, okay. Everybody's just considered presumed disadvantage based on the color of their skin. What if both of your parents are doctors? No, presumed disadvantage based on the color of your skin. So she tried to get to basically economic disadvantage, which she tried to, put as a label around all black people. Black people tend to be economically disadvantaged, and therefore they need this leg up. Well, if that's your case, then you're talking about economic diversity. That's what you actually want to get to. You're not talking about, what about the white kids? What about the Hispanic kids? What about the Asian kids who grow up in very, very poor families? Should they be given a leg up? Because that's not the way Harvard's doing it. It's all about melanin. And this is what Clarence Thomas was trying to get to. And he was like, I don't really know what you mean when you say diversity. That we do have. It's SOT 11.
I've heard the word diversity quite a few times, and I don't have a clue what it means. It seems to mean everything for everyone.
First, we define diversity the way this court has in its court's precedents, which means a broadly diverse set of criteria that extends to all different backgrounds and perspectives and not solely limited to race.
Tell me what the educational benefits are.
The most concrete possible scenario is stock trading. And there are studies that find that racially diverse groups of people making trading decisions perform at a higher level, make more efficient trading decisions. And the mechanism there is that it reduces groupthink and people have longer and more sustained disagreement, and that leads to a more efficient outcome.
Well, I guess I don't put much stock in that because I've heard similar arguments in favor of segregation too.
So he says, give me an example. He says, it's not all about race. Okay, give me an example. What it means. Oh, here's one about race. This is the only one I have. And Thomas says, I don't find that persuasive because actually what you're talking about is segregation could actually lead to good results as well. But when they got pressed on the economic disadvantages some kids have and so on, they had no answer for it. And that's what the conservatives were saying, which is you cannot make skin color the ultimate thing. What they're doing right now, Andrew, is they're saying to the Asian kids who grew up poor, who grew up with no advantages, who went to crappy schools but just worked very, very hard after school and at night, you're out because we have this secret personality test and we can downgrade you because of your ethnic heritage thanks to our personality test. We can say you suck as a person, but really it's because you're Asian. And then we can upgrade the people who happen to fall into racial classifications that we like. People who happen to be black or perhaps brown, those are the ones we like, so they get up. I mean, this is insane. What we're actually doing is totally unconstitutional.
Absolutely. And, first of all, I have to say, I don't know what we did to deserve Clarence Thomas, but I hope we keep doing it because he is a gift from God. But yes. The thing is, this is a question of failed policy all around the bend. The black movement into the middle classes was faster before the Great Society was instituted. That's the thing that really destroyed the black family and really made people dependent on government largesse and slowed the rise of black Americans into the middle class. And those Great Society programs provide lots and lots of money for Democrats to buy votes with. They do not want to look at they're always talking about the core problems. Where does the problem come from? What are the root causes? The root cause is the fact that the black family has fallen apart and fatherless children do very badly. And that really is the thing that they don't want to face because that is based on Great Society programs that basically paid people to have children out of wedlock.
Before I let you go, A Strange Habit of Mind. Give me a couple lines on why I want to read it.
Oh, it's the sequel to When Christmas Comes, which was a USA Today bestseller. The hero, Cameron Winter, is fighting a social media billionaire whose opponents get canceled for good. And this is the first character I've ever wanted to make into a series. I have 30 years of crime writing. This is the first time I've had a character I want to make into a series. So I hope people will turn up for this book. The reviews have been ecstatic. Take a look on Amazon. I think you'll really like this book.
I'm into crime. It's a nice escape to read about somebody else's problems. I appreciate it. It makes me feel better about my life. Andrew Klavan, a pleasure as always. Thank you for coming on.
Great to see you. Thanks.